of food intolerance and sensitivities. And I'm going to go ahead and let Christy Falk in South Carolina, the founder of the Wellness Council of South Carolina, go ahead and introduce our awesome guests that we have here. And I want to thank you, Dr. Shinsato, for being here with us tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I met Dr. Shinsato, it was actually November 2013. Can't believe it's been that long. We were at a chiropractic convention in Seattle, and she happened to be set up there, and I was having some difficulty at the time with my breathing from the sarcoidosis, and she was there, and I immediately felt this trust in her, and we've been working together ever since. So she's amazing. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Lorena Shinsato.
Hi. Thank you. So basically, we're going to talk about making sense of food intolerances and sensitivities. I'll go through a number of things. I am a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist in Washington State. So I'll talk a little more about what being a naturopathic doctor is. And if, Danny, are you controlling the slides or am I controlling them?
I've got them. So if you change slides.
Yeah, that'd be great. I have to go through some disclaimers and disclosures. The following presentation is for informational purposes only and is not meant to imply a patient-doctor relationship with the presenter. And I'm licensed in Washington State as a naturopathic doctor. However, naturopathic doctors are not licensed in all 50 states. They often serve as consultants with patients who have their own primary care providers managing their conditions. I was not compensated for my involvement in this presentation, and any information presented here are my viewpoints alone and is based on my own research, clinical experience, and my degrees in naturopathic medicine, molecular biology, acupuncture, and oriental medicine. I do use lab companies listed in the presentation. However, I do not receive compensation for recommending their services. I am also a Washington State Bar Resource Representative, where I serve as a paid consultant to healthcare practitioners, assisting them with clinical and product recommendations. So now on to the real stuff. My background. Yeah, I have been in private practice at Prima Vita Family Medicine for the past 8 years. I have a doctorate in naturopathic medicine, a master's in acupuncture and oriental medicine, and I was a former research assistant at institutions. So I have a lot of background in science and research. So what are naturopathic doctors? We combine the wisdom of nature with the rigors of modern science. We complete a 4-year program in clinical and didactic sciences at an accredited university, such as Bastyr, Boucher, National College of Natural Medicine, Canadian College of Natural Medicine, or Southwest College of Natural Medicine. NDs pass extensive postdoctoral board examinations, and they are licensed in the US and in Canada in the following states, and as listed, and in Canada, all provinces. So I just wanted to go over some principles of naturopathic medicine. We believe in the healing power of nature, vis medicatrix naturae, which we believe that there's an inherent self-healing process in people, and that it's ordered and intelligent. We act to identify and remove obstacles to healing and recovering, and to facilitate and augment this inherent self-healing process. We also work to identify and treat the causes, tolle causum. We would like to identify and remove the underlying causes of illness rather than to merely eliminate or suppress symptoms. We also follow the first do no harm, primum non nocere, which we follow 3 guidelines to avoid harming the patient. We utilize methods and medicinal substances which minimally risk the side effects, force necessary to diagnose and treat. We avoid, when possible, the harmful suppression of symptoms, and we acknowledge, respect, and work with the individual self-healing process. Doctor as teacher, docere, is a very key principle for naturopathic doctors. We partner with our patients and we educate them and encourage them to have their own participation and responsibility for their health. We also recognize and employ the therapeutic potential of this relationship. We treat the whole person. We treat each patient by taking into account the individual physical, mental, emotional, genetic, environmental, social, and other factors. And since total health includes spiritual health, we encourage individuals to pursue their personal spiritual development. And lastly, prevention. We emphasize prevention of disease by assessing risk factors, heredity, disease, and by making appropriate interventions in partnership with patients. Did you know that according to the USDA, it's estimated that over 34 million people in the US have a food sensitivity, and nearly 12% of the US suffers from migraine headaches, with a third of sufferers getting them more than 3 times a month. According to the Mayo Clinic, as many as 1 in 5 people have irritable bowel syndrome, yet fewer than half seek medical attention. Common food intolerances are dairy, gluten, soy, egg, peanuts, nuts, and shellfish. Did you know that I once treated a child who exhibited aggressive behavior every time he ate peanuts? He was a mouth breather because he was so congested he couldn't breathe through his nose. You could hear him across the room breathing as if he was standing next to you, breathing in your ear. We eliminated peanuts and dairy from his diet, and his parents then could no longer hear him breathing or snoring from his bedroom when they were in the living room. He also became a much calmer, focused, and happier child. So children who have recurrent ear infections are likely dairy intolerant and also have a history of being predominantly formula fed. This is because breastfeeding is a wonderful way to help boost the immune system of an individual. Did you also know that most of the foods that people are intolerant or sensitive towards are high in histamine or release histamine? We'll talk a little more about that in the future. Histamine is the first step in inflammation, and it causes swelling, bloating, runny nose, itchy eyes, all of that type of allergy-like symptoms people experience. Did you also know that most people who are gluten intolerant are dairy intolerant? And that most sensitivities result in acid reflux, bloating, gas, diarrhea, or along with sinus-related issues. Runny nose, congestion, recurrent sinus or infections. Age, most people lose their ability to digest dairy products easily. To the meat, we're going to talk about, is it a food allergy or food intolerance? So a food allergy is an abnormal response to a food triggered by your body's immune system. An allergic reaction that is a function of the specific immune system. So symptoms for a food allergy should occur all time a person is exposed to the food. Food anaphylaxis, which is a very severe food allergic reaction. And pain can result. Severe hives or eczema can result. Unrelenting diarrhea, a drop, itching or swelling in the mouth, or tightening of the throat, and vomiting. So labs, usually for food allergy, a doctor will give you a skin prick test, blood test to look at IgE, the antibody for the immediate reaction. Then usually when people have an anaphylactic or a severe reaction to a substance. Our food intolerances are what most people experience. Generally, they're less severe, and they're usually digestive in nature. They can range from any of the following: achy joints, bloating, includes problems focusing or memory issues, constipation, fatigue, can be or foul-smelling farts, headaches or migraines, itching or itchy ears. It can also include mood issues such as anxiety, someone being easy to anger or irritability, rhinitis or sinusitis, so runny nose, congestion, recurrent infections, skin issues, itching, flaking, dryness, hives, eczema, psoriasis. It can make you sleepy. You could get sore throats. You could gain weight. Causes of food intolerance. You could be lacking an enzyme. You could have celiac disease. You could have food additives. Food poisoning could be a cause. Irritable bowel syndrome or recurring stress can make you become sensitive to foods. So the best way to test for food intolerances, the gold standard is a physician-supervised oral food challenge. The pros of it is that it's systematically testing one food at a time, and you see if that food causes a particular reaction. You have to wait about 3 days between testing a new food to allow the body to reestablish its baseline of non-reactivity. Next is it's time-consuming. Office visits, and it's very tedious. Many people are eating a variety of foods a day, and it's very difficult to keep your diet the same. And most people are not body aware enough to know what to look for or notice any changes when eating certain foods. So therefore, it has to be a physician-supervised setting. What labs do most people get? Usually the first labs that your general practitioner or an allergist will go ahead and recommend is the skin prick test. So as you see, there's a picture. What they do is they will draw a grid on a part of your body, and they will go ahead and prick your skin with a little bit of the particular allergen and watch to see if there's a wheal or a red circular reaction that appears immediately to about 20 or 30 minutes later. So it's very helpful for immediate reactions, which is the IgE, the immediate reactions. However, it doesn't really tell us, it's not great for food intolerances because food intolerances are usually delayed reactions and they're measured differently. You would need to stop taking antihistamines before the skin prick test to make sure you get an accurate result. We're on the next slide.
Oh,
and it could severe reaction. So IgE is commonly given, however, it doesn't really identify food intolerances. It identifies anaphylactic or something you should avoid because your body's reacting immediately. So the IgE or IgG blood food sensitivity tests. So what they are is you can get your blood drawn, and then we are looking for the IgE, the antibody that shows immediate reactivity, or IgG, the antibody that shows a delayed response. And after you get the blood draw and you review the results where it says, hey, you have a high level of IgE of this, so you'd want to avoid that, and any of the IgGs, you avoid it for about 6 months, and then you systematically reintroduce. Usually people feel better avoiding foods that they've been eating a large quantity of, and it's helpful. However, it's not necessarily accurate according to some because the IgG shows that you've been exposed or you've been eating that food, a lot of it. Doesn't really mean one person is actually having a reaction to the food. It is assumed that a lot of times if you eat enough of a food, you can begin to become intolerant to it. For example, there's a very severe case where a friend and colleague that ate tofu all the time as her predominant form of protein. As a vegetarian, she tofu'd out. And 7 years later, she has an anaphylactic reaction to tofu, any form of soy. So it is possible to, if you eat something too much all the time, your body can become intolerant to it, and sometimes it can become immediately reactive to it. So the labs that are generally used are US Biotech, Great Plains Laboratory, Genova. So it's better to order labs from companies that specialize in these types of testing. It's more affordable, the panels that they offer, and they run it often. A lot of times if you're going to one of your regular labs, Quest, LabCorp, PacLab, any of those labs that you would routinely get your blood drawn at, they actually have to send blood out to a specialty lab to test for some of these. So, and it's a lot of times it's more expensive when it runs through insurance that way as opposed to if you paid up front. So the cost of an IgE or IgG blood food sensitivity test, it's around $173 to $360. And the average is about $219 for a 96 food panel. That from US Biotech, that's a quote from them. It helps to identify your immediate IgE reactions and potential IgG. Remember I talked that IgG is what you've been eating a lot of or exposed to. And it may be preferred for people who have extensive rash or eczema, because this way you're not getting pricked with an allergen and potentially having an itchy red spot. The drawback of the IgE, IgG tests is that there could be a high rate of false positives. And for all the reasons I explained before, an IgG antibodies show your body's been exposed to it, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're intolerant or sensitive. The next test, ALCAT, is through Cell Science Laboratories. It is a comprehensive non-IgE mediated food sensitivity and intolerance test that measures an individual's white blood cells reaction to a particular allergen. It is non-specific immunity test. It is about $110 to $610.50 or more. It depends what panels you're choosing. They have so many different panels, and that's why the range is very large. You can do anywhere from 50 to 200 foods. It can test molds. It can test preservative additives. It can test food additives, food colorings, and it can test environmentals, chemicals. They also look for 20 antibiotics or anti-inflammatory agents. There's a 50 female or a 40 male herbal panel, and there's also a 50 functional foods and medicinal herbs panel. They do have a gluten or gliadin panel, as well as an MTHFR panel. So MTHFR is a specific gene, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase gene, that is involved with detoxification. So that is a whole nother field to talk about, but I just wanted to mention that if you have a single base change in this gene, it could affect the function of it, which could affect your ability to process certain components of different foods. So that's why I was mentioning it here. But that is a very detailed, that could be a whole nother webinar, maybe later. So blood tests, 4 vials need to be collected for the platinum panel. The platinum panel covers almost everything I listed in that list. And then it takes about 2 or 3 weeks for results to be processed. And then the practitioners will advise people to avoid the foods that show up red and orange for 6 months. And then there's a yellow group, and the yellow group, they'll ask you to rotate that every 3 days. So it is a diet change. They give you a nice booklet that talks about all the food groups. They talk about, they give you a nice little wallet card that you can keep in your wallet to review, like I should definitely avoid this and I should rotate these every 3 days. And also they give you a half-an-hour consult with a nutritional counselor that's included with your fee to the ALCAT. They are very comprehensive, and they identify the final common pathway of pathogenic mechanisms, immunologic, toxic, and pharmacologic items that underlie non-IgE mediated reaction to foods and chemicals. It could be the drawback, yeah, it's expensive. And yes, it will not identify anaphylactic IgE immune-mediated responses. And sometimes people feel overwhelmed when they look at this and they're like, oh my God, these are all my favorite foods. What can I eat? Or I don't believe this test because they don't want to adhere to it. So it takes working with a counselor, nutritional counselor, as well as a healthcare provider to really understand how you can implement this into your life so you can identify how to start feeling better. So just a brief intro on some of the most common food intolerances. Eggs is a common one. However, eggs can also show up on an IgG test. Remember how I talked about that in a blood test? Because most of us are immunized, and they actually grow a lot of the vaccinations in eggs. And so that's why we have a reactivity towards eggs in some of those IgG tests. Dairy includes, there's a lot of dairy in baked goods. Casein is a molecule that's in cheese and a lot of dairy products. Creamers, cow, goat, or sheep-based. Cheeses, as well, cow, goat, or sheep-based. Ice cream, cow's milk-based. Kefir, cow, goat, or sheep. Milk, cow, goat, or sheep. Yogurt as well, from cow, goats, or sheep, because there are all non-dairy forms of these. Whey is often a top protein powder chosen to build muscle, and it's also a flavor enhancer in some foods. So you have to be careful because on packages, there was literally a a brown rice chip I like that was a seaweed flavored. And I just thought that, hey, you know, there's no dairy in it. And it actually had whey in it as a flavor enhancer. So you really have to be careful. So gluten. So what does gluten? Gluten is the component that makes breads moist and chewy and stick together. So wheat, rye, spelt, triticale, breads and pastas, gravies and sauces, because it's a thickener. And oats. Oats are gluten-free, but they're often processed in facilities with gluten, so that's why oats are contaminated. So gluten-free things are more expensive. They tend to be crumblier. So, but there are some good alternatives, so don't lose hope when you try gluten-free things, but it will be a change. Corn is another common one, and corn is everywhere. High fructose corn syrup. It's used as a thickener in things. A lot of the what is it? Vitamin C. Most vitamin C is actually from corn, derived from corn. So nuts. So almond, Brazil nuts, cashew, coconut, hazelnut, pecan, pistachio, walnuts, and peanuts. Yeah, peanuts are not technically a nut, but it is a legume, but a lot of people throw it in the nut category. The nightshade family. Nightshades are very important because a lot of people who tend to have joint issues, they might want to look into the nightshade family. Also, colitis issues, some autoimmune issues, nightshade family is a culprit as well. There's a molecule in the nightshade family that can cause inflammation. So this includes eggplants, tomatoes, peppers, green, red, yellow, or hot peppers, chili peppers, potatoes, shellfish, so clams, oysters, lobster, shrimp, soy. There's soy in a lot of things. Soy is also used as a flavor enhancer and a source of protein for many different snack items. So how can you begin the process of identifying which foods may be triggers for you? That's the question. So you could go ahead and create a food log or diet diary. You want to go ahead and note over the following 1 to 2 weeks, the date, the time, the food, meal, or snack. You want to write down every single thing you eat. Liquids in ounces, not cups, because cups can vary in sizes. I've had people say, oh, I drink only, 2 cups of coffee, and then I realize their 2 cups are like 12 ounces each. Or the type of liquid. You want to also write down whether it's water, juice, tea, coffee, soda, or alcohol. Bowel or urination habits. So this is if it's related to your recent meal or if it's different from your normal habits. You also want to go ahead and include your emotions. Were you happy, sad, upset, or bored? Or any symptoms you might have realized. Were you itching? Were you a little bloated? Were you tired? Did you have diarrhea? Were you irritable? And then what were you doing before or while you were eating? Were you on the phone? Did you have a disagreement? Were you multitasking? Like, were you on the computer or driving? Because a lot of times when you're multitasking, when you eat, you confuse your body. And then your body's trying to do rest and digest, the parasympathetic rest and digest action, when you're in a sympathetic, multitasking, I'm doing multiple things at once mode. And that is not good for optimal digestion. Also, note if you're in a meeting. That is an example of my diet diary that I give out to my patients, usually on my first visit. You fill out the following for 3 weekdays and 2 weekend days because we eat differently on the weekdays and weekend days. And it's exactly what I outlined for you before. I do have patients do it for 1 week or 2 weeks or more at a time, but it really matters. I can get a good snapshot just with 3 weekdays and 2 weekend days. So what do you do next? You do the food avoidance and reintroduction. Usually with a healthcare provider support, you can identify your triggers and avoid them, as well as some of the most common allergens for 3 to 4 weeks. So sometimes I have people do this alone, and we figure out some triggers, and then we start narrowing it down. Other times people choose to do one of the blood food allergy tests, whether it's a IgE, IgG blood test or the ALCAT. More and more of my patients have been leaning towards the ALCAT because it tends to give us more accurate results for food intolerances and sensitivities and covers things that the IgE, IgG tests miss. So you're going to avoid foods for the 3 to 4 weeks, what you think is an allergen. So allow your body a chance to decrease any inflammation And your symptoms usually will decrease in quantity or frequency, or sometimes disappear during this time. Continuing to keep a food diary is very helpful during this avoidance period. And after 3 to 4 weeks of avoiding these triggers, you can then systematically reintroduce a food group at a time. So what does that mean? What that means is, like, for instance, the first thing people want to test back in is dairy, because they love their dairy. So first test milk. Drink a lot of milk on one day, note your symptoms for that day, and then for 2 days later, because remember, the body is triggered, and then it takes about 2 days for your body to go back to baseline, of which you could still be experiencing symptoms from the initial exposure. So the most common symptoms people experience from dairy intolerance are diarrhea and sinus congestion. Remember, food intolerances are often delayed, somewhere from 3 to 72 hours post-ingestion. If it's immediate, it's more of an anaphylactic reaction. Your initial reaction on the first reintroduction is the true reaction. As with subsequent exposures, your body will go ahead and accommodate over time. And I want to emphasize this because I've had people who say, oh, well, it showed up, eggs was on my thing, and I avoided it for 3 or 4 weeks, but I love eggs and I have eggs every day, and I just really want that source of protein back in. So they took it back in on that first day, and the first day they reintroduced eggs, that person had a headache for the whole day. And they usually don't get headaches at all. And then the next day they tried it and they didn't have a headache. So they're like, and the following day they didn't. And they're like, hey, so that means I'm fine, right? I'm like, no, actually the first symptom, your first day of you eating it and having a headache all day is a true sign that you are reactive toward eggs. So you should avoid it. So your next food item to test would be ice cream or coffee or creamer. And then note your symptoms, wait 3 days to try a new food group. Then you test soft cheeses and you note your symptoms over 3 days after exposure. And then hard cheeses in the same protocol, wait 3 days. And then go to yogurts, kefir, baked goods, and then move to another food group. It does take a lot of time, but it is really worth the effort because individual reactions differ from person to person. And this is about your relationship with your body, understanding how you respond to the food, because how you respond to a potential food trigger could be completely different than how someone else responds to it. So the following couple of slides are some resources that might be helpful for people. Oh, sorry, I missed that slide. Many people will choose to avoid foods that cause symptoms while working with their healthcare provider to heal their intestines. So I'm just listing some very basic ones that are helpful, but like I said, you can do the diet, the food log, and then avoidance, and then working with someone who knows your condition and your specific questions. It'd be much better because they can tailor it to you. So DGL, which is deglycerinated licorice, is anti-inflammatory and it's good for mucous membranes. Aloe is also anti-inflammatory and soothing. L-glutamine is an amino acid that is essential for helping intestinal cells repair. It's like their energy source. Vitamin D3. So low levels of D3 can affect intestinal permeability. D3 actually helps keep your cells' junctions tight, so there's no leaky gut. When there's low D3, people have more of a tendency to have leaky gut and then to have food intolerances and sensitivities. Probiotics, so they're healthy bacteria to help with immune and digestive function, and 70% of our gut is in our immune system, our immune system is in our digestive system. So it's best to work with a trained healthcare provider, and they can help you customize a plan and troubleshoot with you and make this a much easier process. And here are some resources: the Gluten-Free Living magazine, Living Without magazine, good resources, celiac.com, which has really good celiac and gluten-free information. Gluten-free is something that most people should really consider because dairy and gluten are the top 2 food sensitivities and intolerances I found, especially for people who have autoimmune conditions or a history of their family having autoimmune conditions. So the Gluten Intolerance Group of America is another good resource. Then there's the Food Allergy and Anaphylaxis Network, and they have wonderful educational materials and information of foods, what is dairy, what is gluten, how can I eat, what can I eat, you know, suggestions. Living without resources, there's a nice resource page where they've linked to other websites and resources for people who have allergies and sensitivities. Allergy UK, this is a wonderful website, very comprehensive with news information about testing and resources for all types of allergies. And then the Environmental Working Group, the EWG.org, they're a nonprofit organization and they have amazing information for health, farming, environmental health concerns, chemicals to be aware of, cosmetic safety database, and more. The cosmetic safety database is called Skin Deep. Please consider supporting them because they really, it's all about education and getting the information out there into the hands of consumers. The more you know, the more likely you will be able to make better choices for you and your family and your health. So some books that might be helpful in this journey would be The Complete Guide to Food Allergy and Intolerance by Dr. Jonathan Brostoff and Linda Gamlin. And they have a handy appendix and a detailed elimination diet, and they talk about food sensitivities in children and chemical sensitivities as well. The Whole Life Nutrition Cookbook by Tom Alter and Alyssa Gerstein. Tom is a Bastyr-trained nutritionist, and his wife and whole food chef, Alyssa, went ahead and created a book that they have gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free recipes, and there's a dedicated chapter on food reintroduction for children. What is the best age to introduce foods at? Because sometimes when you introduce foods too early to a child, you will actually put them at a higher risk for developing a food intolerance or sensitivity to that. Other books to consider are The Gluten-Free Gourmet Cook's Comfort Foods, Creating Old-Time Favorites at New Flowers by Betty Hagman. And she has a whole series, and she has a lot of recipes that are very helpful. Gluten-Free Gourmet Desserts and Baked Goods by Valerie Capillard. So everyone loves their baked goods. They love their scones and their croissants and all of their baked goods, and they get crushed when they're like, no dairy, how can I eat? And so Valerie actually created a whole bunch of French-based baked goods that are all gluten-free. So it's a wonderful cookbook for those people who are like, I can't get my favorite thing gluten-free. So Health Professional's Guide to Food Allergies and Intolerances by Janice Bickerstaff-Joneja. She actually wrote this book because her son suffered from so many different allergies, and his skin, he had eczema, he was getting sick a lot, he had a lot of ear infections, and all the doctors she was taking him to didn't really have answers other than antibiotics, you know, ear tubes, or we're not really sure. So over the years, she compiled and did research, and she got her PhD in nutrition. And she has information on pediatric food allergies, the science behind food allergies and intolerances, and suggestions for management. It's a wonderful book, but let me emphasize, it is very detailed. And it's written more for healthcare professionals, so it might be a little dense, but very helpful, great charts. And she talks about some unknown or lesser covered sensitivities, such as sulfite sensitivities, nickel sensitivities, salicylate sensitivities, and it's a wonderful resource. Probably not the first book I would go to. So that kind of concludes everything. My information is there. I do have a teleseminar series that will be coming up in November, and my website will be having more details, and please bear with us, our website is being finished. So more details can be found there, and if Danny and Christy, if there's any questions from the audience, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Well, this is Danny. Sorry if you guys are getting feedback. I'm hearing it. I don't know if you are, but I always have questions, lots of them, because I love to learn. And thank you again so much for presenting. I mean, so every time Christy and I do these, it's so much information that I have to go back and re-listen and take more notes. But one of the things that you mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar was that some food intolerances can be due to lack of an enzyme. Is there a test that could show what enzymes you might be lacking, or is that part of the food intolerance test you spoke of?
Yeah, so the thing is that it's really hard to test for lack of enzymes. A lot of times when you're testing for enzymatic function, you will be doing like an indirect test. You need to like give someone something and you need to see how they digest something. Or you can do a genetic test, 23andMe. A lot of people have been doing that, and we've been putting it in a different program. And we found that certain people have the gene for lactose intolerance. So it usually for enzymes, it's like genetic testing. But just because you have a gene that shows you're a carrier doesn't mean that you necessarily have an issue with it.
Okay.
So it depends on a number of situations. I always like to tell people, imagine you have a cup in front of you. And as part of this cup, you have like a little bit of this cup is maybe your genetics. So yes, genetics do count. But more importantly, it is how you live your life and the choices you make in your life that determine whether or not your genes will be functioning optimal, or if your body needs support, or it's not functioning too well. The next part of this cup could be, are you eating good foods, or are you doing fast foods? Are you doing whole foods? Are you avoiding the foods that you know about your triggers? Or are you doing a lot of preservatives or processed foods, because that can cause more inflammation in your body? Another thing in this cup could be, are you sleeping well? Another thing could be, are you exercising? Are you happy in your job, your career? Is it allergy season? Did you move into a new home and is your furniture carpets off-gassing? Are you exposed in your job as an auto mechanic to a lot of chemicals, and are you wearing protective equipment? So if all of that, you're not taking care of yourself, not eating right, not sleeping right, and then it's allergy season and maybe you have a reaction or you have a histamine intolerance where you don't have the gene to break down histamine well, then you could be reacted to everything and anything. And that's when it makes it really hard to identify what you're reacting to. So if you identify all those things that I talked about, it can reduce your burden on your body and then reduce your overall inflammatory response, leading to people feeling better.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I know it can be difficult to make some dietary changes like this, but I went gluten-free almost 12 years ago, and it was one of the best things I ever did. I lost almost 20 pounds when I went gluten-free, and I felt amazing. So it really does make a difference.
Yeah, a lot of people will lose weight when they avoid the food that's a trigger. And sometimes people say, hey, it's only, 5 pounds, but that could have been 5 pounds of water. But a lot of people for gluten-free, if it was a big inflammatory trigger for them, they do lose between 10 and 20 pounds. That's pretty common. And their energy improves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they feel much better. Yeah.
Lynn has a question. She wants to know if a Western MD is likely to use an ALCAT test if requested.
It depends on how open the Western medical doctor is, your allopathic doctor. There are a number of medical doctors who do use the ALCAT services, and ALCAT has actually been doing some more research to prove that it is valid and helpful in identifying non-IgE immune related responses. And they have some research studies because they recently did one. I think they partnered with Yale University and they went ahead and sponsored. So they paid for Yale to go ahead and do this test to show that, hey, if we take a whole bunch of people who have food intolerances or sensitivities, and we put them on this ALCAT and we avoid their reds and their oranges, do their symptoms improve? And so there is support, more and more support with research for the ALCAT to provide to your allopathic doctors for them to consider giving this as a test. This is something that they would have to set up an account with the ALCAT, and then you would have to go get your blood drawn at a laboratory with a box, because you usually have to take the box with the tubes in it and then the the lab you take it to draws your blood, and then they ship it off to the ALCAT, which is in Florida. So yes, it is possible.
Dr. Shinsato, have you ever heard of immunolabs? They're also in Florida.
Yeah, the immunolabs, I'm not completely familiar with what their base of testing is. Do you know if they're IgG testing?
I think, yeah, I mean, again, I just have interviewed Jeffrey Zabik, who was the owner, and used them and recommended them to people and write about it in my book. But they've had really good testing, and I know that there's a lot of doctors that actually use them, and so they're covered. A lot of different insurances will cover their testing, but their testing is more around, they do like they call it the blood work test, I think is what it is, and it does like anywhere from 150 to 190 or 54 to 190 different.
I'm not familiar with that company. It might be also because there's different companies that pop up in the States. So on the West Coast, I haven't really heard about the immunolabs, but if they're IgG, IgE testing, they're probably similar to what I listed, like US Biotech. They are.
Okay.
They used to be covered by insurance, but a lot of these labs, unfortunately, they start to go towards patient direct pay because their insurance companies are having a harder time to get paid. So therefore, they just make the patients resubmit.
Okay.
So these tests potentially can be covered by insurance because I have had patients who use their flexible spending accounts or their HSA accounts, health savings accounts. And then they've submitted the invoice to their insurance company asking to be reimbursed. And some of them do get reimbursed, but the percentages varies depending on your insurance plan.
Have you noticed, or is there proof or anything on if you detect a food intolerance at a younger age? I asked this because our son at 6 years old was having chronic stomach aches, leg aches, headaches. I mean, we took him to doctor after doctor, emergency room visits. We thought he had appendicitis a couple of times. You know, we were doing the whole question and answer. Did we move? What is he eating different? What's going on? And finally, after like 9 months, and I was just disgusted, we finally took him to a naturopath. And the first thing the naturopath did was, a blood draw.
Yes.
But he told us that it was much, you get better results with a blood draw than you do with the skin prick. Is that?
So yes, what he's saying is it's based on the skin prick. Sometimes it only identifies IgE, so it's immediate reactivity. And so most food sensitivities and intolerances are delayed. So that's the IgG.
Okay.
So you'd have to get a blood test. And in the blood test, you can actually test for IgE and IgG. So most naturopathic doctors will test for the IgE and IgG if you go to them. That's the most common food intolerance panel, but some people mistakenly call it a food allergy panel, is the IgE, IgG testing. And if you do avoid the IgGs, which usually what shows up the highest is eggs usually shows up and dairy. Those are the two most common. And then sometimes some random things. But most of the time it'd be like graded from 1 to 5 and then, or from red, orange, yellow, green, that type of thing. And you would avoid what is in the red and orange area. But the food intolerances and sensitivities are delayed, so cannot be identified by a skin prick.
Okay, that makes sense.
But remember, it's a inferred, meaning that we're assuming that eating something a lot, your body will then sometimes make a reaction to, which is where allopathic doctors and alternative doctors can sometimes disagree, because allopathic doctors will say the IgG being present says the immune system's working well, because if it's being exposed, it's responding appropriately. Whereas naturopathic doctors a lot of times will say, well, it's likely that they're eating too much of this, so their body's causing a reactivity, which might mean that this is what they're sensitive to.
We have a couple more questions. If a person's been avoiding foods, are skin tests still valid?
If you've been avoiding foods, the skin test should be valid because it's measuring an IgE It's measuring the immediate reaction. But do note that sometimes people can show up positive on skin tests and say, I've never really had a issue to that. And even for blood tests, with testing, it's so hard because there's something called sensitivity and something called specificity. So I used to work in a lot of laboratories, and the more sensitive a test is, the less specific it is. So it could give a lot of false positives because it's binding to everything. However, if it's more specific, it's less sensitive. So it's kind of, you have to look at the test and look at what is the percentage of accuracy in terms of how sensitive it is, how specific it is, and how it's being used by the practitioner.
Okay, and Marilyn asks, what are your thoughts about carb avoidance in addition to going gluten-free?
So carb avoidance is, a lot of times what I tell people to do is doing a whole foods diet, and then a lot of times people just, if they go to a paleo-like diet, paleo meaning more just protein, so usually it's like meats and proteins, no legumes, and no carbs, and then, so therefore no gluten. And so nuts, seeds, and healthy oils, usually people, or like a Mediterranean diet kind of thing, that's what most people tend to do good on. A low carb diet, a lot of people will lose weight and feel better. They'll have more energy because a lot of people actually have insulin sensitivity, or some people will actually have issues such as problems digesting complex sugars. So if for some reason you have tried probiotics and you're like, everyone says probiotics is amazing, but when I take it, my stomach hurts and it makes me constipated, or I feel weird, and you think you're the only zebra in the pack, and it's not because of probiotics are bad, it's because the probiotic you're taking likely has inulin, fructooligosaccharides or oligosaccharide, which is a complex sugar, and some people have problems digesting that. So avoiding carbs would be a nice way to, you know, if you're going gluten-free, if you avoid carbs, it would probably be pretty easy for you. And it's actually indicated in a lot of things. Nice serving of vegetables, good serving of protein, nuts, seeds, oils, yeah.
Are there any other questions? Doesn't look like it.
So I know it's a lot of information, but just read through it and look at the websites and talk to your healthcare providers. And it is possible to figure out a better way of feeling, because a lot of times food intolerances and sensitivities are hard to pinpoint. But with your help and working with a good healthcare provider, you can figure out what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth searching for the needles in the haystack, so to speak, because what the final question I have is I really feel like food intolerance was a big missing piece to the puzzle for my husband, and obviously for my son. We got on him early because at 5 he was having such, you know, horrendous symptoms. But my husband Jack was also diagnosed with sarcoidosis, just as Christy and many of our listeners. And we did not know. It was something we had to find out on our own about food intolerance, what it even was. I mean, we knew what a food allergy was. Somebody eats shellfish and they, you know, end up in the ER, or they have to have the EpiPen or whatever. But we didn't realize the intolerance. And the more I studied and researched and learned about it, the more I feel very strongly that it's something that I wish that this Western medicine, allopathic, traditional medicine would test for more regularly, because I feel like we could prevent a lot of future chronic autoimmune diseases that are people in their 30s, 20s, mid-20s to early 30s are experiencing. Is ignoring it for many, many years, does your body end up in disease to the point of chronic disease?
Yes, so naturopathic doctors work usually with people who have exhausted all other paths. sometimes it's a last ditch, like, I don't really believe in this, but I've been to 12 specialists and 3 general practitioners, and no one's been able to help me, and these drugs aren't doing much for me. So it is true that looking at lifestyle factors, I mean, remember how I talked about naturopathic doctors? A key point is teaching, is doctor as teacher. It is helping you understand what symptoms your bodies are telling you. So if you were to focus on your food, and you can do a lot just with diet, it would be a huge key to the puzzle, and it would put you ahead of the pack. I mean, unfortunately, there isn't enough time in our insurance model system for Western medicine to spend the time needed to educate people on this, because it's confusing. Even some healthcare providers don't really understand, why we would use this test versus that one, or that doesn't make any sense. No, we only do skin prick. The blood ones don't work at all. But time and time again, for people with chronic diseases, when they identify their food sensitivities and intolerances, they begin feeling better. I've had people who had positive ANA, or rheumatoid factors, anti-nuclear antibodies, all of those autoimmune panels, they were positive when they started working with me. And 2 years later, they're all negative. And even their rheumatologist was surprised and said, "What are you doing differently?" And literally it was an LCAT test, looking at diet, acupuncture, supplements, biotherapeutic drainage, making sure you decrease the stress on your body so your body can then heal and repair better, and therefore function better, and then you have more energy, and then your symptoms and your condition starts improving. Food is a huge key, and paying attention to your stress, identifying triggers for stress, stress relaxation, how do you modulate your stress? Unfortunately, too many people nowadays, they don't have an outlet for stress. Most men, their outlet is exercise. So if they get injured and they can't exercise, they're very upset, because their only way of getting their stress out was taken away from them. And a lot of people just work, and then all they do is they come home and they watch TV, but they don't have activities that bring them joy. They're not doing things they love or spending time with people they want to spend time with. And so stress can actually increase inflammation in your body and can make you be more reactive. So there are many keys to this puzzle, but identifying foods, intolerances, and sensitivities can really help everyone out and be a big picture of chronic disease. It really is a huge part of chronic disease.
Well, Dr. Shinsato, again, I just want to thank you. Not only have you shared excellent information with us, but just listening to you, your tone, I mean, everything makes me more relaxed and de-stressed. It's been really a joy, and we just appreciate you taking the time. I know we know you're super busy seeing many, many patients, and so we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope that you guys are able to just review this and start taking note and seeing, maybe I'll try dairy. Usually the 2 top ones, dairy and gluten. And just try it out and see how you feel. That's all I ask my patients. Try it out for a month, see how you feel. And usually they become believers, even though that's their favorite foods. It's like, okay, what can I do to feel better? So thank you very much, Danny and Christy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christy, for seeing Dr. Shinsato so we could all get to hear from her tonight, too.
Absolutely. I told you she was awesome.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful evening. We'll be sharing this on our survivingsarcoidosis.com website. And then also between Christy and I, we're going to pick a winner this evening, and they will get the Education Beats Medication book, and which is the book that I wrote about sarcoidosis. It's kind of a sarcoidosis survival kit, I call it, along with 10 interviews, very similar to the one we did this evening. And we'll be announcing that on our Facebook page tomorrow afternoon. So thanks everybody for listening in. And I know we've all learned a lot, and we will all be revisiting this webinar when it's up on our website.
Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.